Today, we'll hear from Rafaela Crevoshay, an expert in compost, regenerative agriculture, and sustainable soil management. Compost is a wonderful addition to our soils. It stimulates microbial activity that benefits plants, it helps hold water in the soil, and it provides nutrients that plants need. Please welcome Rafaela Crevoshay.
Thank you, Emma. Let me just get this presentation up. And there we go. Okay. All right. Thanks for the introduction. I want to challenge you. I want to start off by challenging all of you great gardeners, whether you're novices or experts, to shift your focus. Shift it away from the plants, from the broccoli and the onions and the cukes and the tomatoes. Let's shift it to the soil. That's our emphasis. That's our focus. Now, transformative gardening is what the topic is. It's taking things to the next level. And the reason we're able to do that is the proliferation of raised beds invites us to do it. Now, I know everybody doesn't have raised beds, and this methodology can be adapted to other formats. But basically, we're going to talk about it as it's evolved with the raised bed. Now, there are three principles of modern progressive agriculture: organic, sustainable, regenerative. And transformative gardening is built on this foundation. Now, organic represents an effort to release our habit. And by our habit, I mean humanity's habit of contaminating our environment as we produce food. Now, Sir Albert Howard, a British researcher who worked at the indoor experimental farm in India in the 1920s, that's about a century ago, is considered by many as the founder of the modern organic farming movement. And along with that, the modern composting methods. Now, the organic farming movement created an evolutionary trend that defines a biological alternative to the 20th century's chemical approach to agriculture. And this was basically an inheritance from the late 19th century. A German chemist named Justus von Liebig kind of formulated the basis for chemical fertilizers and later for toxic industrial pesticides. But organic liberated growers from dependency on these chemicals and empowered a soil-based approach to plant culture. Sustainability is a more modern iteration. It gained a lot of popularity in the 90s when it was first defined by the UN World Commission on Environment and Development, which defined it as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So sustainability is an effort to preserve our current viability into the future, into an uncertain future. Okay. In recognition that we burn the resources of the future, we're challenged to be conscious of this. So sustainability is kind of it's a way station. It's a necessary step in the evolution of gardening and of agriculture in general. Then we come to regenerative farming, which is a relatively new phenomenon in the world of agriculture and certainly in the world of gardening. And by regenerative, we're talking about soil management that aims to sequester carbon, inhibit soil erosion, and regenerate microbial life in the soil. Well, this is just what the doctor ordered for the current state of affairs on the earth. We have the technology to do this. We have the technology, and it's pretty simple and straightforward, that allows us to sequester carbon and at the same time create an adequate soil structure to prevent further soil erosion. The United Nations, again, has, as the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, forecasts that in 40 years, if we don't do something about it, we will have lost most of our soil resources to erosion. So this business of releasing chemical agriculture, industrial agriculture, and replacing it with a rational approach is urgent. So now let's talk about the transformative concept for basically starting with the raised beds. It's based on the organic, sustainable, and regenerative methods. It includes all of those, the best of those, and in an integrated and comprehensive way. It empowers you, the grower, to choose a best soil. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I set up some raised beds a couple of years back, and when they were empty, I looked at them and realized that what kind of soil we use is up to me. So if the goal is to provide a soil that is rich, even super rich in microbial life, and the technique is to approach gardening as a partnership with nature, I thought, why not use compost, 100% compost? Well, typically, when a person starts out to garden in a new situation, in a new location, whether it's their backyard or anywhere else, the effort is all about trying to restore the neglected backyard soil. Well, now that's not such an easy thing to do. Most soils on the best day have about 3% soil organic matter in the soils. 3%, that's all. That's not very much, but that's considered pretty good for most soils. Now, if we add compost and just grow in pure compost, we're up to the 95% range. We've got a whole lot more of organic matter. And the organic matter is the home of the microbial community. So it's kind of a no-brainer to opt for compost. So compost and vermicompost, worm compost, or worm castings are considered the most microbially enriched sources of soil organic matter. And the process of compost preparation makes nutrients readily available to plant and microbes. I want to say something about the word topsoil because it keeps coming up. In soil formulations, you can look on YouTube, you can find dozens of presentations recommending the use of topsoil. But what is topsoil? Topsoil can be almost anything. Soil is typically made up, it's always made up of sandy, loamy, or clay portions. And there's a whole lot of combinations that go along with that. It could be rich in soil organic matter. It could be 3%, could be even 4 or 5%. or it may be 1% or less. And it may have excellent soil structure or not. So in other words, when a vendor tells you there's a topsoil component in her soil, it doesn't mean much about soil quality. So that just to put the topsoil topic in context. Now, in terms of filling the raised beds, we or small plots, especially raised beds, we fill the raised beds with compost to a depth of 12 to 15 inches. Now, most vegetable plants have root zones that only go as deep as 6 inches, maybe 7, 8, but typically 6 inches. And those that dive deep can go beyond that, and they'll find their way. So the additional depth allows for the additional depth beyond the 6 inches allows for ongoing composition, allows the soil to settle, and that gets us going. Now, this is a bed that I planted a couple of years ago. It's still going very strong. So the question is, it's kind of related to the topsoil concept, because what does compost mean? Compost describes all kinds of composted materials. You can make compost in a very passive way. You can pile up a bunch of leaves and kitchen garbage and put it in a pile and just leave it there and come back in a year and a half or 2 years, and it'll be composted. It'll be fully decomposed, and it'll be soil, technically soil. But we're looking for the best compost to use, the best affordable compost at least. So we're looking for manure-based composts. Now, manure-based composts are at the other, they could be made by a process that's at the other end of the spectrum from that very passive approach to making compost that takes a year and a half or 2. This is a method that utilizes compost at about 30% of the total. The rest is straw and other organic waste. And now this is made, this invests the compost with a very high level of nutrition. And that distinguishes it also from that passively made material that I referred to earlier. Now, our country has a surplus of manure. It has so much manure that in some areas it's a disposal problem. They don't know what to do with it. It can contaminate local water supplies. It can create serious odor problems. And in some region, manure mountains are an ever-present feature of the landscape. But anyway, there has been a very robust movement nationally to compost all of this manure according to a scientific procedure that's based on heat, because the compost, once it's established into a pile, very rapidly generates its own heat. You know, there's the old image of the haystack catching fire. Well, all the compost needs, with all that manure in there and the organic matter, is some oxygen. And it only takes about a day and a half for very high temperatures above 140 degrees Fahrenheit to be generated. So this is the standard procedure. It's defined by the USDA. So within 36 hours of making the pile, the hot temperatures are achieved. And if we just turn it every couple of days, it continues to maintain that temperature, and the outside of the pile goes to the inside where it's hottest, And if we continue that process for a matter of several weeks, we get a very high quality compost. And you can see how it's steaming away there. Even in the dead of winter, those temperatures are active and the compost is processing itself. Now, most major metropolitan areas and many other population areas have professional compost yards. These compost yards are all over the country. So for most of you, it should not be a problem to access them. And it's not expensive. It's pretty inexpensive stuff. For a small amount of money, you can fill 3 or 4 beds. And that's a lot of compost for a small garden. And by the way, I don't want to ignore the fact that if you buy this compost, you're joining the in the intelligent management of this resource nationally. You're working against the collection of manure mountains. So this is an important function that we can perform as growers, is to be part of this system. Now, vermicompost or worm compost is also part of this system. And it's a very critical part of this system, because worm compost, though it's very similar to the high quality manure-based thermophilic compost, the use of the worms causes the use of worms invests the soil with huge amounts of bacteria and fungi that aren't found in standard compost. Now, here's a this is a compost yard. The stacks are 15 feet tall. There are many of them, and it's just impressive how this product is made. Now, I want to emphasize that this is not something you should do at home. You can do it if you have enough space to build a 5x5, at least a 5x5 compost stack. If you have a good supply of cow manure and straw or equivalent, if you have the ability to turn the stack inside out every 3 days. In short, this is not practical for most backyard situations. It's so much easier just to go buy it and bring it home, and it's ready-made, and you know the quality is beyond reproach. Now, the quality of this manufactured compost is closely monitored and certified by the U.S. Compost Council, the USCC. They use their seal of testing assurance, the STA, and this takes the guesswork out of it. If you purchase it from an STA certified yard, you'll know that it's got its quality, and it enables you to ask some questions, because they have to fill out a form that's regularly updated that attests to the quality and the contents of this compost. So be sure that you have manure in the compost, and be sure that the certification is in place and current, and you can rest easy. You don't have to try to evaluate it further on your own. That's what the USCC is for. They're there to do it for you. Now, if you go to the USCC website, you can access a map, which I was not able to copy onto this program, but it's there, it's available, and it shows facilities all over the country, everywhere. Now, not every one of them is making manure-based compost. Some of them just make what you might call a vegan compost, a compost that does not feature manure. But there are sufficient locations that do make manure-based compost, and you can find them on that map. Now, getting back to vermicompost, this is compost that has passed through the guts of the earthworm. The process invests the material with a quantity and diversity of microbes that dwarfs that of standard thermophilic compost. Well, you know, there's some anecdotal stories I could share with you about that, but I was interacting with an academic researcher a few years back, and she said, "Oh my God, compost has so much microbial life in there. It's amazing." I said, "Well, why don't you test some vermicompost and let's compare them?" And she came back to me and she said, this made my jaw drop. There's no comparison between the microbial life in vermicompost to that of high quality manure-based thermophilic compost. An estimated million organisms in a cubic centimeter of vermicompost. That's pretty amazing. There we go. Okay, now this, I have to apologize for this picture, but I think you can make it out. The sample on the left is a pot grown with vermicompost, and you can see the proliferation of roots. The one on the right is a control without vermicompost, and you can make out that it doesn't have that. It's an amazing comparison, and it holds up right throughout the vermicompost story. Now, evidently, one of the kind of special elements in vermicompost is something called humic acid. Now, that's effective as a yield-enhancing plant hormone, and it's very much sought after. In fact, it does occur in nature. It's generally found in a coal-like mineral known as leonardite. Now, leonardite, like other coal products, takes at least 1 million years to form, or more to form in the ground. And it's mined and it is sold commercially for agricultural purposes for its humic acid. But that humic acid isn't all available immediately. It takes time to break down and become more available for plant life. And it's a positive thing. But humic acid is fabricated by worms in VC, which is what we call vermicompost. And it becomes available in weeks or months. So miraculously, our vermicompost is loaded with humic acid, and humic acid seems to be the holy grail that can influence production. Now, that's a vermicompost machine. It's not the only way to make it. There are very simple, much simpler ways to make it. This is the state of the art. What is done for vermicompost is there's a process of creating the feedstock or the substrate, which is basically a manure compost. And in that case, they use over 90% manure and a little bit of straw. And it only takes 3 weeks to compost it. And it's then fed into the worms. There are worms in this bed of this machine bed, and it's the new compost is placed on the top. The worms feed from the bottom up, and when they're finished digesting the lower levels, it just falls out to the floor and it's harvested. Now, so what do we do with this? What's the point? Okay, it's a great story, but we need to get it into the beds. We need we need it to benefit the soil and consequently benefit the plants. So we recommend planting every plant with some vermicompost, whether you have a furrow or a small hole, whether you're planting seeds or whether it's transplants. Put at least a handful of vermicompost in the pot. Now, it raises a question. Well, why don't we just fill the whole bed with vermicompost? Well, yes, we could do that, but it's not cheap. Unlike the standard manure-based thermophilic compost, this is about 5 or 6 times more expensive because there's quite a process involved. So if you can afford it, more power to you. But for most of us, this is the practical solution. It'll benefit those specific plants and it will inoculate the beds further. And you will find within weeks or months, a lot of worms starting to enjoy living in your bed too. And that's always a very positive thing. Now, this is a quote from Charles Darwin. Okay. Yeah. Now, Darwin, late in his life, did a lot of work with earthworms. And he wrote a book called The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Earthworms. Now, Darwin, at the end of his life, at an interview, was asked what he felt his most influential work was. And of course, the expectation was that he would cite The Origin of Species, of course, his great work on evolution. But he didn't do that. He said, my most important work was the formation of vegetable mold through the action of earthworms. He was so convinced that this was the most important topic to focus on in his lifetime. And I think we could still attest to that there's a lot of validity to his point of view. The third leg of the stool, now we've got soil, we've got our thermal compost, we've got our vermicompost, and the third leg of the stool is to recharge the soil microbes with fish emulsion. Now, fish emulsion is a very popular soil amendment that's thought of as a fertilizer. And I'm not saying that it isn't a fertilizer, but it has another role too. It charges up the soil to the benefit of microbes. So we're saying, okay, use those two kinds of soil, and then once a week, give the soil a drench with fish emulsion. And you'll keep your microbes happy, keep them active, keep them reproducing, keep them proliferating. Transformative gardening. It's not just about compost. Now we can do those first 3 things, but we're not done. It won't just take care of everything. We've got to follow up with some other procedures. And I just want to note those, so that's not really the topic of this presentation. I want to emphasize the importance of these other procedures. One is no dig, no till, and no pull. And no pull refers to don't pull out a plant by its roots. No till, well, tillage is more of a feature of commercial and large-scale agriculture, but it is done in the garden too. And we recommend to not do it, and not to dig in your garden either. Now, why are we doing those things? We'll get to that in a minute. The second thing is the biodiversity of planting, which is very important. And it's very important from an ecological standpoint. And finally, environmental pest management. Now, yeah, I'm trying to read this. Okay. Okay. No dig, no till, no pull. This is a fundamental technique of regenerative agriculture. when a plant is spent, when you've harvested the crop, your tomatoes are gone, it's time to take it out. Typically, traditionally, a lot of people will just pull it out. No, we don't do that. We cut it off at the surface. And the same thing for everything else, except for root crops like garlic, for like beets, carrots, those sorts of things, onions. You have to pull them out, but we have to do it carefully, and that can't be avoided. But for everything else, they should be cut off at the surface of the soil, and that preserves the integrity of the mycelial networks in the soil. Mycelia are the threads of the fungi that go all throughout the soil. And if we don't, it's taken a lot of effort by them and by us as growers to nurture those. So it doesn't make sense for us to break them up by pulling out the soil. So we want to preserve them, and we want to preserve the colonies of bacteria that are also living in the soil. So no dig, no till. Then there's biodiversity. It is a good idea, but it's not just a good idea. It's a prerequisite for pest management, among other things. But it also gives honor to what's going on below the soil. Here we've created a fabulous array a fabulous ecological array beneath the soil, all kinds of microbes living, tremendous biodiversity. We know, or at least we believe, that this kind of biodiversity beneath the soil nurtures balance, creates a balance in the soil, so that pathogenic bacteria and organisms can't really take a foothold, because there's such a population of competitors and predators that it all comes into balance. Well, we're following the old adage, as above, so below, but it's in this case, it's as below, so above. We want to have diversity in the soil. So when we're encouraging gardeners to assess their situation before their plant, don't just automatically go out and plant a whole bed of a monocrop, of one crop, row after row. Think about what you can do to diversify it. Think of the possibilities of planting several varieties. Think of especially including flowers and herbs within that mix. And then there's finally environmental pest management. Now, it used to be called IPM, and IPM is still practiced, but there's a movement afoot fairly recently to reform it, because IPM users have continued to use toxic industrial pesticides within it. They don't use it as a primary treatment typically, but it's always available as an option. And we're saying, no, that's not appropriate. That's going to not only impact, it puts beneficial insects at risk, but we also assume that it's going to impact negatively on the life of the soil too. So there are a few elements to IPM. One is selection of cultivars, that's cultivated varieties, resistant to disease. So if you're living in the humid east, say from the Mississippi east, and you have a problem with tomato blight, select a cultivar of tomatoes that's blight resistant. This will go far in the disease prevention and management area. And then you have to support predatory insects and pollinators. In some cases, that may mean buying a package of ladybugs from your garden store or something like that, ordering them in. praying mantises, things like that. These all help. And then to use organic fungicides and pesticides, those only approved by OMRI, the Organic Materials Research Institute. That will verify, that will confirm your use of safe materials throughout your environmental pest management program. And of course, biodiversity is a fundamental of that. But it's so important that I gave it its own page in its own category. So here we are. We're ready to summarize. We're talking about using these three legs of the stool: 100% manure-based thermophilic compost, using vermicompost at every planting, and using fish emulsion as an ongoing soil management procedure. So we're doing all these things, and we've shifted our focus. I hope by now we've shifted our focus to the life of the soil and taking care of the soil and assuring that the soil has everything it needs so it can do its job to nurture and support a healthy crop. Yeah, compost, it's a can of worms worth opening. Open that can. And that wraps up the presentation, Emma. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just changing my settings here so I can see us both. All right, I have a number of questions for you that I collected from the chat. Let me pull up the screen here. Thank you also all of the participants for your patience while I figured out getting the chat working. I really appreciate it. All right, the first question comes from Lucy G, who wonders if one can really get manure compost in an urban area like Denver, for example.
Yeah, well, I'm not specifically familiar with Denver, but I have looked at the USCC map, and there's plenty of resources in the area. So you shouldn't have any problem. Now, if you do have an issue with it, if there is any kind of scarcity or availability situation, please contact me and I'll work with you to find it. Because I'm impressed with the national availability of this stuff.
Yeah. And Rafaela, could you put your email in the chat?
My email is, oh, there it is, right there.
Okay, great.
So I'll add it to the chat as well if you like.
All right.
Okay, yeah.
Got lots more questions coming in.
Yeah.
For apartment and balcony planting, what is a good source of soil? Can folks go to the Composting Council's website to find compost near them that they can use for that?
Yeah, good. I appreciate that question because I've neglected the patio gardeners, and it was not intentional. I just wanted to offer the basic program, but certainly it works for patio growers. One thing I would suggest for all patio growers is to look into cloth pots. This is an innovative. It's an innovation in home gardening. They seem to be superior to clay pots or plastic pots because they have aeration on the outside of them, and that causes the roots not to grow out but to grow back in and remain healthy and not become root bound. But basically you can follow this method. You can use the manure-based thermophilic compost and the vermicompost for home garden. Anything you're growing in pots or containers can accept that, and you can be very successful with that.
Thank you. We've received a number of questions about how one knows whether compost is safe, specifically manure compost, since so many cows have these grain-fed diets and they're given all of these antibiotics and hormones and whatnot. Is their manure compost made from their manure still safe to garden in?
The question is about safety. Well, anything that's got an STA certification is 100% safe. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but
I think they're worried whether those toxins would still be in the compost.
right. And there have been some episodes where there was a case in Vermont about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, where the compost yard had used horse manure that had contaminated medicine, that had horse medicines in there that caused crop failures. That's an issue. It's not typically any kind of an issue with the manure-based thermophilic compost, because that is almost invariably cow manure. It has not evidenced any kind of problems at all. So I can't guarantee that there'll never be an accident, but the probability of you running into that kind of a situation is extremely slim.
All right. This next guest wonders whether they should mix the organic compost in their backyard with manure compost when building a raised bed. Can they use just organic compost mixed with soil for the beds?
Could you read that again? I want to make sure I've got it right.
Mm-hmm. Can or should they mix organic compost from their own backyard with manure compost for a raised garden bed?
Oh, I see. Yeah, organic compost. Well, you should be making, everybody should be making compost on their own. Everybody's got lots of kitchen waste. And it's for us to discard that and throw it away is ridiculous. It should go back into our soils. Yes, you can use it. You can add it to your bed. Now, one thing I neglected to mention is that you'll need to add 2 to 3 inches of the thermophilic compost twice a season, at the beginning of your season, at the end of your season, to replenish your beds, because it settles down and it decomposes. So you should do that anyway. And you can add whatever you have in terms of finished kitchen waste compost, just add it in. Yeah, sure, absolutely use it. Yeah, just keep it in mind. Keep in mind, though, it's a great thing to reuse that stuff. It doesn't have the potency of the manure-based compost, but it's good. It's good. It's got lots of microbes in it, and it's already broken down, and it's a positive thing. I just would not recommend it as the primary soil substrate.
Okay, all right. There was quite a bit of debate and questions going back and forth about whether you need a certain type of earthworm to do vermicomposting at home. There was some concern about invasive species and like red wigglers and whether those are okay to use. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay. The worm of choice, so to speak, is the red wiggler, which is the Latin name is Icenia fetida. And that is recognized as the friendliest and the best source of the best worm to use in making compost. Other worms could be used. I've never had any experience with them, but one of the advantages of Vicenia fetida is it's called an epigeic, EPIGEIC. It's an epigeic worm. It's a feeder that feeds from the bottom to the top, and that makes the management of your vermicompost much more rational and convenient.
And is there any consequence of using those red wigglers since they're not native, or?
Well, in terms of being not native, it's a little late to be worrying about that. There are so many species in this country that have that come from elsewhere, and they're not just worms. There's every kind of plant. There are animals. There are all kinds of fish, and it's kind of beyond our control. Now, I'm not just saying give up and don't worry about it, but I'm not aware that the red wiggler has really caused any problems beyond the compost yard. But maybe there may be some reports out there about that, but I'm not aware of those.
Okay. And where can one get these worms if they want to do vermicomposting at home?
Well, that's I don't have a USCC type of map for that, but if you look around your area, you will find there are a lot of people making vermicompost on a kind of a homemade basis or a very small scale part-time thing. Those people will sell you vermicompost, though you can get it in garden stores too. Nowadays, it's quite available. There are some bigger vendors who are selling it. But for those who are looking for worms, I recommend going to those mom and pop size units, and they'll sell you the worms too. And you don't need many to start. You don't need a whole, like a pound of worms will go a long way. And you'll have your own colonies for years if you take care of them.
Someone in the chat noted that they multiply quite quickly.
They do. They do. They do. That's right.
All right.
Yeah, 30. I see on the chat $39.99. Yeah, yeah.
Good find, Faye. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
What about potting soil one can buy in the store? Do you recommend that for organic planting, or would you not trust them?
Well, I have some pet peeves about that, but I do use some store-bought potting soil. If you go into the big box stores, you'll see these bags that say organic, and all that. But basically, they are a mix of predominantly decayed wood or partially decayed wood, and that's not what I'm looking for, because that wood is going to be a drag on the nitrogen sources in your garden and will take years to decompose. So read the label carefully. Look for ingredients that have a small percentage or no percentage of wood products in it. It just doesn't help you that much.
What about coconut?
Coconut, yeah, coir is great. It's a great amendment. It's the modern substitute for peat moss. And there's problems with peat moss, ecological problems with peat moss, because we're basically destroying these peat bogs that are.
Yeah, Green America, one of our campaigns is against using peat and
Good for you. Good, great. That's good. That's important. Don't use peat. Use coir. Well, coir is it's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leola S wonders if fish emulsion is sustainably produced.
Well, I suppose we could poke holes in that one too, but basically it's made from all of the guts and offal and the heads and tails and stuff of the after fish have been processed for human consumption. So what would be the alternative? Would be to just throw it away? No, this at least is a way to use it to our advantage and put it back in the soil. So I would tend to favor its use.
Okay. Jonathan W. asks if there is a problem with glyphosate residue in straw that one might use in their compost.
Yeah, glyphosate has it's guilty as charged of many of the transgressions that have been leveled against it, and I support those. But fortunately, it does break down, and from as I understand it, you can't even find it after several months. It's just breaks down in the soil. So that is not one of the big issues with glyphosate, though there are many other issues that would counterindicate using it.
All right. And folks, I'm just noticing we're at the top of the hour, but Rafaela has agreed to stay on and continue to answer your questions. Again, if you do have to leave, we'll record all of this and you can watch what you missed later. And if you are leaving now, thank you so much for joining us. All right, next question. If someone is adding urine to their compost, should it be diluted?
No, urine is great. It's great in compost. I wouldn't add it directly into the garden. I would use it just that way and use it in your garden. Yeah.
All right.
In fact, it raises an issue. Is that, I mean, this is really where we're headed in the long term as a race. You know, we flush away our human waste, and it goes into the ocean, or it goes into, I don't know, waste residue, waste treatment facilities. But this is valuable stuff that could be used. So yes, absolutely, put it in the compost.
All right. Chuck R asks if you can add shells from lobsters, clams, and other shellfish to your compost.
Yeah, in fact, I'm aware of some composters in fishing areas. I know of a couple of them in New England and another one in Washington State. And the Washington State guys are using, I believe they're using salmon and the offal from salmon. But I understand the guys in New England are making it with lobster ground up and some other kinds of, I don't know what it is. It's lobster and maybe crab, and it looks very good. It looks like really good stuff, but it's not in the same. It's not the cheap available stuff that we're talking about with the cow manure based compost. This is more of an elite amendment, but maybe worth a try if you're in those areas.
Elizabeth, I see your question, and what I'll do is I will put a link for the first webinar we did on composting in the chat, and that'll, I think, really help you to get started if you're interested. What about human manure made from compost toilets?
Oh yeah, it's great. It's great. You know, there's been a project in the country of Haiti that's been going on for, I don't know, maybe 10 years, maybe a little bit more. And they're using compost toilets. Well, they have an issue. You know, some of those villages didn't even have a proper outhouse. You know, they had a hole in the ground. I don't know, very primitive. And it's been very successful. They the waste is composted and it's used agriculturally, and it's completely safe. Once it's properly composted, there has to be some supervision there because you can't do half the job. Yeah. So yes, yeah.
Anthony asks, what about using biochar in your compost and garden?
Okay, biochar, that's a good one. Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, biochar is effective. However, we have to look at the kind of adaptive aspect of this. It's great for extensive agriculture, for larger commercial fields, and for where you have small amounts of organic matter, and it can really make a difference. It can add something to the soil. The general consensus is that for this kind of operation, you've already got a very robust substrate in operation, and the biochar won't bring much of a margin of improvement. So you can use it, you can try it. I'd be surprised if you get a big kick out of it, but maybe in your circumstance, it'll help. It'll be worth it.
All right. This is more of a soil in general question. Can you explain the value of nitrogen in the soil in simple terms?
Yeah, well, nitrogen, there are three principal chemicals that are considered essential for plant growth. These are the macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And nitrogen influence is always thought to influence vegetative growth, in other words, leaves. Phosphorus is influential on flowers, and potassium, geez, I'm drawing a blank on that. But fortunately, you asked about nitrogen, so I'll address it in a nitrogen. Yeah, it is important, but there are a lot of issues with nitrogen. For example, in conventional agriculture, when nitrogen is added, a significant amount of it is never used by the plants. It just goes into the soil and into the water supply and down the river. It just doesn't get used. So that's an issue, and it's a hard one to get our arms around. The other thing is that is this the only way plants need nitrogen, but does it always have to come from fertilizer? Now, there has been a discovery about 10 years ago of something called rhizophagy, which is root. It's called rhizo is root and phagy is eating. And we know now that plant roots will allow certain bacteria to enter their root hairs, and then they degrade their cell walls, and the plants feed on the nitrogen and the other nutrients that are in those cells. And then the cells don't die. They're expelled by the plant, they reform their nuclei, they proliferate. So this is an alternative phenomenon that feeds the plants nitrogen. So this is really in the pretty early stages of our understanding, but there seems to be other pathways for delivering the nitrogen to the plants, rather than to just put it on in the form of ammonium sulfate or manure, for that matter, or even compost.
All right. I think this might be the last one. Nope, I just had another one come in. Second to last one, maybe. Annette asks, or Annette explained that her compost pile always has tons of earthworms in it. Does that qualify it as a vermicompost pile?
Yeah, basically, but not when you've got a big population of worms. Wait till they finish their work and they will move on. They'll migrate, or they might die. But let them do their work, and yeah, that's vermicompost. Yeah, or worm castings. Yeah, sure.
Do you have a winter cover crop recommendation?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't address cover crops, but it's part of keeping the soil covered at all times. And we do suggest that you rotate in your beds, one bed, at least one bed every year, a cover crop. And it doesn't have to be for the whole season. And it could be, for example, if it's in the summer, buckwheat is very good. In the winter, mustard is very good. You can use cover crops really any time of the year, depending on your climate. If you're in California, it's one thing. If you're in Maine, it's something else, because you'll have to respect the cycle of the climates. But an even better approach and more effective and proven by some of the regenerative experts is using mixed cover crops, using 2 or 3 or 4. I've even seen as many as a dozen in a field. That gives you a tremendous diversity, and it's not just what goes on up above the soil. The diversity in the root zone is very beneficial too. So I hope that answers the question.
Can you compost paper that has been bleached?
Yeah, you can.
All right. Follow-up question to cover crops. What do you do with it when you want to plant your garden?
Well, a good thing is just to take a weed whacker and cut it all down at the surface of the soil. Now, that gives you a couple of options. Once, you could leave it there, let it fallow for a while. You could leave it there and plant into it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd probably be my choice. But another thing you can do is take all those clippings and put them into your own compost piles with your kitchen garden, and with your kitchen garbage, that is, and then use that compost to replenish your beds at a time that it's ready.
All right. This is a question that's near and dear to my heart, because it upsets me every time I hear somebody has this experience. Mabel's wondering, how does she protect her crops from aerial spraying?
Oh my God.
This might be a whole new can of worms.
Yeah, I mean, it's, most of the gardeners on this in this audience are not likely to have that problem. But if you're living in a semi-rural area, it could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really a kind of a political solution, not a horticultural solution. It's serious. I mean, you don't want that happening, and they shouldn't. They would be in legal jeopardy for spraying over a populated area. That's out of bounds for them. So I would urge you to seek a remedy with your city government for that one.
Mm-hmm. Continuing on the not digging in the soil and disturbing roots and whatnot, Kathleen's wondering, how do you plant in the soil if there's existing roots in it? Is it tricky, or do you have suggestions for how to make that successful?
No, it's not tricky. You have to dig a little bit, but it's a small amount. If you're just planting a seed, it's just a very small area, and it's not very deep, and it's not very wide. So you can do that. I mean, these are all rules that have to be broken at some point, but that's a very minor infraction. It won't really affect your soil health. And remember, those roots will be feeding your microbes for quite a while, and then they'll eventually be gone, and you'll have new roots there.
Mhm. Trying really hard not to break into the Lion King circle of life. All right. Well, I can't see this person's last name, but this person asks if you have suggestions for fire ants if they're in an outdoor compost bin. They used, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, spinosad.
Spinosad, yeah, yeah.
They note that that seems to fix the problem, but they have mixed feelings about its impact and
No,
whatnot.
spinosad's okay. It's okay. It's an OMRI approved product. There have been some issues with it in Canada, I understand, but that has to do with pollinating honeybees. So as far as I know, it's okay to use it.
All right. Well, that was the last question I had here, Rafaela. Thank you so much for teaching us so much today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah. Thank you to the 85 of you who stayed on 15 minutes past the hour. I appreciate all of you as well. Thank you so much for your engagement. And please join us on November 3rd for our next webinar. You'll definitely be getting an email about that from me soon. All right. Bye, everybody. Take care.